Coming up.
You make more than the Prime Minister of this country. That's your compensation. So to get a bonus on top of that at a time when viewership is down, ad revenue for your organization is down. I asked specifically about whether or not you would refuse to take a severance package at the conclusion of your term as CEO.
I believe that Canadians would expect that...
And you're saying it's purely political. And what I'm saying is the big, beautiful, growing movement to defund the CBC is not a purely political movement, but it is a matter of taxpayer accountability. Can you not acknowledge that?
I will not...
Those bonuses are going to be tied into your exit package in January when you leave. So I think it just seems natural to me. Your fiscal year end is March. You haven't received your package. I suspect the previous 5 years you got a bonus performance pay package. You haven't received one for 22-23, 23-24, and probably 25 up to January when you leave. So my worry is we're not going to be able to scrutinize this.
By your own information, you lowered those KPIs in order to see that they were met. So in other words, what you have stated is that by lowering the KPIs, your organization and those within management are receiving more information. Mr. Goldblum,
could I respond to that?
I'd like to ask, well, I'm just stating the facts, Ms. Tate.
This guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
Ms. Tate, again, I would ask, for the fiscal year 2022-2023, did you receive a bonus? Okay, thank you, Ms. Tate. Mr. Goldblum, did the board request to the government that Ms. Tate receive a bonus?
The board provides its assessment of the CEO's performance, and we share that with the government. It's for the government to decide whether or not it pays a performance pay.
And did the board give the assessment that Ms. Tate should receive a bonus to the government?
I think the specifics of that recommendation is confidential, but I would say the board has been very supportive of Ms. Tate's performance.
So, thank you, Mr. Goldblum. So, Ms. Tate, I would ask again, and it's my understanding that your term will be coming to a close. I believe January 3rd is the end of that. Now, in terms of performance pay, bonuses, and a severance package, we are in a situation where Canadians are struggling. The cost of living is making it unaffordable for so many Canadians to afford the essentials. Yet, when you look at the bonuses, $18 million awarded across CBC, including averaging tens of thousands of dollars to executives within the organization, yet your metrics certainly don't seem to add up with the talking points that are provided. As you conclude your tenure at CBC, can you commit today that you will not take a severance package or bonuses for the last 2 fiscal years?
You've made several points in that question. What I would say is, first of all, if we're talking about 22-23, all the results of that year are public. For 23-24, all of the key performance indicators set out and approved by the board were achieved, if not exceeded.
Thank you. So with respect, Ms. Tate, I did ask specifically about your compensation. So when the range of compensation that is provided, you make more than the Prime Minister of this country. That's your compensation. So to get a bonus on top of that at a time when viewership is down, ad revenue for your organization is down. I asked specifically about whether or not you would refuse to take a severance package at the conclusion of your term as CEO.
I believe that Canadians would expect that the corporation honor its commitments to its non-unionized employees as it would to its unionized employees, and I would just correct the record. Whereas total ad revenues are down, digital ad revenues are up. Since the beginning of my tenure, which digital revenue was at about 38 million. This last year, it clocked in at about 100 million. So I think it's important that we have accurate descriptors of what's going on at CBC Radio-Canada.
So Ms. Tate, you said that confidential, that information, but that just doesn't work for Canadians. Canadians look at $18 million awarded in bonuses, the fact that you just spent $1,000 a night for a hotel room in Paris during the Olympics, and we are in a situation where you are coming to the conclusion of your term being paid more than the Prime Minister of this country makes. And you refuse today to rule out that you will receive either bonuses or so-called performance pay or a severance package at the conclusion of your term. It's confidential, doesn't cut it for Canadians. It doesn't cut it for parliamentary oversight. So again, I ask, will you specifically today share with this committee whether or not you will refuse a severance package or bonus at the conclusion of your term as President and CEO of CBC?
As I've said, I consider that to be a personal matter. And
So-
I believe I'm protected by the Privacy Act in that regard.
So Ms. Tate, taxpayers pay your salary, as they do for all of us, and you can Google an MP's salary, you can Google the Prime Minister's salary. But here we are discussing $18 million paid out to bonuses, $3 million paid out to executives. Madam Tate, your own documents show that there are 631 managers at CBC. 43, I believe it is, executives. And you're defending those, the average bonus paid out to executives at your organization is more than most Canadians make in a year, and you're claiming that it's confidential? Madam Speaker, Madam Chair, through you, I would suggest that it is unbelievable that Ms. Tate would come before this committee with a very specific motion outlining that answers are demanded when it comes to the compensation received by a public broadcaster. These are taxpayers' dollars that are paying for this organization. So, again, I will ask and emphasize, Ms. Tate, at the conclusion of your term, whether it's for previous fiscal year's bonuses or so-called performance pay,
30 seconds.
or the conclusion of a severance package, will you refuse that out of respect for the taxpayers that have paid for you to have this role over the last number of years?
I believe I've answered the question, and for the record, I would like to correct some of the errors, in fact, that the member has articulated. One, this $18 million in performance pay is not, these are not dollars that aren't agreed upon well in advance of the end of the fiscal year. We have a rigorous process in place. A process that has been in place for 20 years, Madam Chair. It's a process that is similar to that of other Crown corporations, other government agencies, and most private companies. A process that is guided by third-party consultants that advise us, experts that advise us on what it is we should be paying our executives and our managers.
And how much did those third-party consultants cost?
Mr. Kurek, your time is up.
And I've said this before, I'm a big supporter of the CBC. I think it serves the public good. And in addition to that, in the day of misinformation and disinformation, we need a good public broadcaster that can get out there and really deliver information that's relevant to Canadians. And I think Mr. Goldblum, you said it is a trusted backbone of Canadian culture. It was one of you who said that, but I think it is absolutely true. But what's brought us here today is the $18 million, $18.4 million that was earmarked for bonuses. Before I get into those questions, because you probably remember some of my questions last time, I asked if you'd go back to the board and reconsider the structure, and I'll get into that. But before I go any further, can you explain the word bonus? Explain the process for us. What are we actually talking about? Are these bonuses from your perspective?
No, they are not bonuses. They are what we call performance pay, a portion of the individuals involved. And we're talking about 1,180 non-unionized employees, managers, and executives. A portion of their salary is withheld at the beginning of the year. So let's say you're making $80,000, maybe $10,000
That's
is
in your
withheld.
contract.
It's in
so your contract says I make $80,000.
Correct. And
Okay.
you have, and a portion is withheld And a series of KPIs are established at the beginning of the year.
Can you explain what a KPI is?
Oh, a key performance indicator, and those are linked to the priorities of our strategic plan. So, for example, driving digital engagement in the regions is a KPI. And if we meet the target, those people, those individuals will receive that portion of their performance pay. We have 70% of the performance pay is associated with KPIs, and 30% is associated with the person's individual performance, and they have a manager that oversees their objectives on an annual basis as well.
Mr. Giovanni for the Conservatives. 5 minutes, please, Mr. Giovanni.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Tate, I just want to clarify a couple of things that I heard today. So first, did you say that you were on a personal trip to France, decided to extend your vacation, go to the Olympics, and then bill the taxpayer for it? Is that correct?
I was on a personal trip to France, and I did not bill the taxpayer for my flight or travel from Canada.
What did you bill the taxpayer for?
The hotel and the train to get to Paris.
Where does your personal trip end and your
The day I
taxpayer billing begin?
when as part of my job, being at the opening of the Olympics was absolutely expected of me, so I interrupted my holiday and took the 4 days to go to the Olympics.
Could you understand why that sounds concerning to somebody? Just because, bit of a weird situation where you get to go on a trip, you're having your personal time, and then you just unilaterally get to decide what becomes work and what doesn't?
Well, not if I'm not charging the company for the trip.
But you did charge the taxpayer $6,000.
Correct. When I was working in Paris, I did, yes.
But could you understand why it would be concerning?
I would think that it would be concerning
that decision.
It would be concerning if the CEO of CBC Radio-Canada did not attend the opening of the Olympics, given it was one of the most important events of our calendar year.
But when the average Canadian hears that you're charging thousands of dollars to the taxpayer, and you are just kind of deciding when your personal time ends and your billable time begins, it gets to sort of a broader concern, and to the point about bonuses that many of our colleagues have made today, of whether you have respect for the taxpayer. Can you see why that would be concerning to the average Canadian?
I do not make those decisions alone. I always check in with my chair, and I behave in a responsible fashion.
Mm-hmm. So I'd like to ask if you agree with a statement that's been attributed to you. And I'm going to quote, "The defund narrative has picked up momentum, especially as it relates to CBC television." Did that come from you?
Yes.
Okay. So that was reported last week by the National Post from an email they obtained from you, and I believe in January 2024. Is that correct?
I presume so, yes.
Okay. So when you look at the concerns over your expenses, right, which I think legitimate concerns over where your personal vacation time ends and where your billable time begins, when you see the concerns over news stories related to your bonuses that are going out and bonuses you may receive or executives receive, the $18 million that we've been talking about today, do you think any of that might contribute to what you yourself have observed as a growing movement to defund the CBC?
I absolutely do not.
Why is that?
Because I believe that having experienced now the third appearance at this committee, I would say that there is a clear effort on the part of members of this committee to vilify and to discredit me and to discredit the organization. Not one question has been asked, not one question has been asked about the accomplishments of the public broadcaster over the last 6 years and how we have served
I think our
Canadians.
Liberal colleagues have asked you some of those questions, so I think that's not a fair representation of your time here today. But let's go back to something that our colleague Mr. Coteau asked you earlier. You referred to KPIs, key performance indicators. Would the idea that a growing movement in our country would like to defund your organization be weighed into an analysis of key performance indicators and determining whether the discretionary portions of the bonuses that you've acknowledged there is a percentage that is discretionary and not contractually obligated, that those percentages that you might consider, if people don't like what we're doing, if people don't trust us, if people would like the government to take money away from our bloated organization, maybe we shouldn't be spending more of their money than we have to? Could that not cross your mind in analyzing the KPIs?
We do not take into consideration political wins or influences in determining our business metrics.
So you would call it a political reaction for the average Canadian to hear that you're doling out $18 million in bonuses, that you're billing the taxpayer for your time in Paris while on a personal vacation. That's a political concern that the average Canadian wouldn't have a pure interest in that based purely on the fact that they are giving you their hard-earned money through taxes?
I'm not sure I understand what you're
question is,
getting at on this question. I'm
30
sorry.
seconds,
But
please.
you're trying to marginalize legitimate concerns about abuse of taxpayer dollars and any accountability that we are trying as parliamentarians to introduce here, and you're saying it's purely political. And what I'm saying is the big, beautiful, growing movement to defund the CBC is not a purely political movement, but it is a matter of taxpayer accountability. Can you not acknowledge that?
I will not, Madam Chair, I will not be accused of abusing taxpayer dollars. I'm sorry, for the record. We have managed our budget extremely carefully. We were facing $100 million.
I don't think the Canadian people would agree with you.
Giovanni, will you allow Ms. Tate to finish her answer? Thank you.
We were facing a $125 million deficit. We managed as carefully as we could, and we respected the obligations we had to over 1,180 employees. I believe Canadians will understand. And by the way, 73% of Canadians still consider us the most trusted source of news. 79% of Canadians say they believe that CBC should be in the future of this country.
Is that reported on by the CBC? Those facts?
Gone over time, Mr. Giovanni. Thank you very much.
I'd like to start with maybe the accomplishments of the CBC, such as the Paralympics Games. 11 million Canadians viewed these. Then we also have the North American Indigenous Games, the Arctic Winter Games, the promotion of musicians who are struggling, Canadian musicians. What would happen to all of these people if it's very easy to say CBC were defunded? How would private media interests affect Canadians, the consumption of information they get, the promotion of Canadian values, heritage, culture? What would happen to all of these things if the CBC were defunded? Please, if you can.
So just on the sports side of the equation of what you've asked, CBC Radio-Canada has made a commitment to gender parity in amateur sports coverage. That means we've gone from 4% of women covered in sport to 50%. And in parasports, we've made an enormous commitment to coverage on a year-round basis. The IOC considers CBC Radio-Canada in the top 5 Olympic broadcasters in the world because of our year-round commitment to amateur sports. And just to be clear, if not for CBC Radio-Canada, and we heard this from the Canadian Olympic Committee, the Paralympic Committee last week at a conference where they stated without prompting from us that without CBC Radio-Canada, there would be no support for our amateur athletes in this country. So it is profound. Similarly, on the music side, without the Junos, without La Disque, without all of the things that we do for emerging talent, music, writing, performing, we would be impoverishing this country.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome again, Ms. Tate, along with Mr. Goldbloom. I noticed in your opening statement, because today we invited the senior management and compensation at CBC Radio and CBC Television. So your opening statement didn't talk about the compensation. You talked about how accurate your news bureaus are, the trust that people have in you, you're based on facts, but you never talked about the $18.4 million in bonuses. So let me start there again, if you don't mind, Ms. Tate. For 2022-23 bonuses, have you received your compensation package for 22-23?
Are you talking about me personally?
I'm talking about you personally.
So just to be clear for the record, the CEO of CBC Radio-Canada does not participate in the payment plan that 1,180 people participate in.
So you haven't got it yet.
The process is different. It goes from a recommendation from the board to the minister and from the minister to PCO. And to date, I have not heard back on that particular.
On that year. How about this year, 23-24?
Same thing.
Okay, so here's what I'm thinking. Those bonuses are going to be tied into your exit package in January when you leave. So I think it just seems natural to me. Your fiscal year end is March. You haven't received your package. I suspect the previous 5 years you got a bonus performance pay package. You haven't received one for 22-23, 23-24, and probably 25 up to January when you leave. So my worry is we're not going to be able to scrutinize this because you're going to leave. Mr. Goldblum and as board chair, they're going to recommend a bonus package up 2.5 years. And we won't get a shot at you coming back here in 25 to talk about it. And that's why Canadians are upset about the bonus package. And let me give you a few examples, because I did a survey of my own, and I know it's not Toronto, it may not be Vancouver, it may not be Montreal, but here's what my constituents, when I sent out, 1.4 billion a year and bonuses of 18.4 million, that's insanity. That came from Elaine. This is from Carol. I refuse to listen or watch CBC News anymore. You know the metrics in Saskatchewan. Nobody watches or listens to CBC. Here's from Dawn. Totally unfair to taxpayers and hungry folks in our country. From Trevor. Nobody I know watches or trusts CBC anymore. From Rita. Waste of taxpayers' money to fund bonuses on the executives. Should be a complete overhaul from the CEO and management. That came from Rose. Joanne, CBC has been a huge waste of taxpayers' money. Defund this as soon as possible. From Dan, as a lifelong listener, CBC has lost its ways. So we had hundreds of responses from little old Saskatoon. 80%, 86% major changes to the corporation or defund them entirely. 86% out of Saskatoon. What do you say about those numbers?
I say I travel this country from north to west to east, and I also have hundreds, if not thousands, of positive remarks back on how important CBC Radio-Canada is in those communities that I have visited. In the north, in Yellowknife, in Whitehorse.
How about Saskatchewan?
And by the way, in Saskatoon,
have you ever visited Saskatoon, Regina?
I have, both Saskatoon. I went to the Yorkton Festival.
Just 1 minute.
Okay, so
some order, please. A question was asked of the witness. Can she finish answering it, and then you can go with the other question. Thank you.
I would just point to, because there is a large Indigenous community in Saskatchewan, and we spend a lot of time engaging with those communities in the development of our Indigenous strategy. And I would say, across the board, I have heard only quite frankly, a willingness to work with CBC and with Radio-Canada to change the narrative about Indigenous people in this country, something that this organization is 100% committed to.
I've got
30 seconds.
30 seconds left. So from your strategy, public affairs, and government relations person, on average, each visitor spends 37 minutes a month on your platforms. 37 minutes a month. Ms. Tate, that is two at-issues. 37 minutes is nothing. You talk about 21 million each month are hitting your platforms. The number that stood out to me, they're on there for 37 minutes a month. It's deplorable. You're not reaching out to Canadians. 37 minutes a month. Think about that.
Thank you, Mr.
Well, when you hear about in your workplace and in the CBC community this defund narrative, tweets in front of the headquarters in Toronto, diminishing and reducing, in a sense, the value and fueling that discussion around defunding the CBC. How does that impact your ability to recruit the talent that you need? So both from your resource perspective, but also from a morale perspective. What is the impact of this line of thinking that's being advanced around the CBC?
Thank you for the question. The first one was I had articulated earlier that the cost to Canadians is $32 per person per year. And for that, CBC, Radio-Canada provides, as I've said before, services on linear television and radio, over 45,000 hours of original video content, 7,000 hours a day distributed across the country, 95,000 hours of audio, and the list goes on. What I would say is that $32 has not budged. We used to just deliver television and radio, and we're now doing all the other things on digital platforms, on streaming, audio, and video. So we've expanded the services without increasing the budget. With respect to morale, I can tell you that it is not easy, especially for our employees at CBC, though I would say our colleagues at Radio-Canada are equally nervous. But at CBC, it is highly demoralizing to be the target of constant criticism when you're working each and every day to bring Canadians fact-based news and information across this country and to be commissioning some of the best programming in the world. So it is hard to attract people when the organization is so uncertain, when the future of the organization is so uncertain. And I would just say that the sooner that this narrative is either shut down, the better, because it is really, really damaging the reputation of the organization, certainly more than performance pay.
Thank you for that. I believe I'm sharing my time with my colleague, Patricia. Happy to turn the floor over to her.
But that's news to me.
Oh.
I thought Ms. Satanzio was, I have on my name here, she's up in the next round. Ms. Gainey, so
well, I apologize, I misunderstood.
You have 2 minutes.
I will wrap it up then, that's fine. Thank you.
I now go to the final part of this round, and it's for the Conservatives, Mr. Kurek. For 5 minutes, please, Mr. Kurek.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. You talked a lot about trust and relying on the facts, and it is a fact that there were significant job cuts at CBC. In fact, cuts that were made just before Christmas. It is a fact that performance pay bonuses were awarded very generously to the tune of more than $18 million. And to reconcile that with your testimony here today is quite something. So we did do some digging into these KPIs, the key performance indicators, and some of the targets, and you talked in your previous testimony before this committee a lot about a process. But what I find very interesting is that it's only the reports that come out of the CBC and where they fan over how great you're doing. To the tune of maybe the only place that you'd be more popular than that is at a Liberal cabinet meeting. But even today, you suggested that we shouldn't, to one of Mr. Cotto's questions, you said that you needed to be realistic in that. So these KPIs, this year, or this past fiscal year, you said your own metrics say you met 13 of the 14 performance targets. A massive increase from only meeting 3 of the 14 targets the previous year. Something doesn't smell right with that. When it comes to the actual meeting targets, tangible, we started going through some of that information, and you lowered the KPIs for this past year, some of them quite significantly. Now, Ms. Tate, compared to the previous year, 3 of 14 versus 13 of 14, does that affect bonuses?
Sorry, the years you're referring to? 20? 22, 23, and 23, 24, not 14, correct?
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes.
What was the question?
So in 2022, 2023, you met 3 of 14 KPIs. This last year, you met 13 of 14. Did that affect the bonuses paid out?
Of course it did.
Yet, by your own information, you lowered those KPIs in order to see that they were met. So in other words, what you have stated is that by lowering the KPIs, your organization and those within management are receiving more information. Mr. Goldblum,
could I respond to that?
I'd like to ask, well, I'm just stating the facts, Ms. Tate. Mr. Goldblum, I'm wondering if you could share with this committee. I'm wondering
Excuse me, please.
Point of order.
Yes, Mr.
I really do think if you're making such a grand statement, I think the witness should be able to respond to it. That's just fair.
Thank you, Mr. Couture. To make that, one cannot make a statement without allowing the witness a chance to respond. So, Ms. Tate, please.
We have a very rigorous process in place for establishing KPIs on an annual basis. We look at previous performance, but most importantly, we look at what's happening in the industry. When you see a trend of 5% decline on television subscription, you don't ignore it, you adjust your KPIs accordingly, and we build in stretch. So what that means is every single KPI is looked at, and by the way, they are not all lowered. They are, in the case of kids, in the case of diversity and representation, there are a number that are higher than the previous year. But just to be clear, we're not making up KPIs. They are based on what is going on in the industry. And I think you've heard on a number of occasions from others that this industry is in decline. It is an extremely challenging time. So how do you manage that, and how do you keep your people motivated to go forward? You build in stretch.
That stretch is a new word, and certainly there seems to be some stretching taking place here. Mr. Goldblum, can you commit to release to this committee the information related to recommendations that you have made for Ms. Tate's bonus and recommendations that you would make to the government when it comes to severance?
As I said before, our communications with the government around the performance recommendations of the CEO, my understanding is that's governed by privacy. So
okay, thank you. I do have one last question.
But I do want to say we will make public the report done by the independent organization that's going to look at our compensation, and we'd be pleased to share those recommendations with you.
Thank you. Please do. Ms. Tate, the CBC stopped broadcasting the Calgary Stampede a number of years ago. Why?
I wasn't at the organization at that time, so I can't comment on the specifics of that decision.
Is Western heritage and frontier culture important to the CBC?
Absolutely it is. Absolutely it is. It's why we're rolling out more journalist positions in the West disproportionately to anywhere else in the country.
So I want to nail down specifically, could you provide information related to the specifics around the Calgary Stampede to this committee, please?
Thank you.
I'm happy to.